Viewer discretion is advised. Its painted eyes seemed to be staring right into his soul. Welcome back, shadow dwellers. Tonight we have 3 Appalachian Mountains horror stories inspired by real events. But that last story? It left me with a visual that I haven't been able to shake since the moment I read it. Now let the nightmare begin. Route 220 is a stretch of blacktop you want to avoid after dark. It cuts through Highland County, Virginia, winding through mountains that block out the sky. No streetlights, no gas stations, just miles of trees that lean in too close and cell service that disappears right when you need it. It was late September, but a storm had rolled in that turned the night into a wall of water. The rain wasn't just falling, it was hammering the roof of the car, coming down in sheets that blurred everything beyond the hood. Cassidy was 31 and trying to break a personal record driving from Texas to Washington, D.C. She wasn't a trucker. She was a corporate professional who treated her luxury SUV like a rolling trash can. Inside the car, it smelled like stale pepperoni and anxiety. She'd been driving for 14 hours straight. The passenger seat was a wreck. A greasy pizza box sat on the leather next to a pile of empty Red Bull cans in the footwell. Every time she hit a bump, those cans rattled like a bag of loose bolts. A bag of jelly beans had spilled into the center console, mixing with loose change. Stopping wasn't an option. Cassidy was obsessed with her GPS arrival time. To keep awake, she blasted a self-improvement podcast. A guru's overly enthusiastic voice filled the cabin, preaching about optimizing your potential and the hustle mindset. It was annoying, but the constant noise kept her eyes open against the rhythm of the windshield wipers. Limestone doesn't care about your potential. A jagged chunk of rock, slick with rain, was sitting dead center in her lane. Cassidy didn't see it until it was too late. Bang! It sounded like a gunshot in the wheel well. The steering wheel jerked right. The SUV lurched, the front passenger side dropping as the rim ground against the asphalt. Cassidy fought the wheel, panic spiking. She managed to wrestle the heavy vehicle onto a muddy turnout just before a curve. The rain hammered against the metal roof, deafeningly loud. Cassidy gripped the wheel. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She checked her phone. No service. She looked at her outfit. Ivory cashmere sweater, suede ankle boots that cost $800. Outside, the rain was turning the turnout into a swamp. She opened the door and stepped out. Her expensive boots sank 2 inches into heavy, wet mud. The rain soaked her sweater in seconds, plastering her hair to her face. She wiped water from her eyes and walked to the passenger side. The tire was shredded. Ribbons of rubber hung off the rim like dead skin. She had no idea how to change a tire. She knew she had a spare, but she didn't know a jack from a wrench. She stood in the downpour, feeling totally exposed. Then she heard it over the sound of the rain. A low mechanical rattle, headlights cut through the storm. A vehicle was coming. Cassidy waved her arms, desperate. An old station wagon slowed and pulled in behind her. A 1984 Ford Country Squire. You don't see cars like that anymore. It looked like a ghost ship. The wood paneling was peeling. Rust streaked the fenders. One headlight flickered against the rain. The engine died. A man got out. He was big, maybe 50. He wore a stained John Deere cap and a heavy yellow slicker. As he got close, even through the rain, Cassidy smelled him. Wood smoke and old tobacco. "Trouble?" he asked. His voice was gravel. "My tire!" Cassidy yelled over the rain. "It blew out. I don't have service." He nodded, no smile. He walked past her, looked at the wheel, and grunted. "Got a spare?" I think so. He didn't say another word. He went to his wagon, grabbed a heavy iron jack and got to work. Cassidy watched for a second, then retreated to her driver's seat and locked the doors. She was soaked to the bone. In the rear view, she watched him. He was efficient. He didn't seem to mind the rain. He cranked the jack and swapped the wheel. It took 15 minutes. That's when Cassidy noticed the passenger. A woman sat in the front seat of the Ford. She was perfectly still. She faced forward, staring through the windshield where the wipers were stopped. She didn't look at Cassidy. She didn't look at the man. She didn't blink. Her skin was pale, almost gray. She looked like a mannequin. It gave Cassidy the creeps. A sick feeling settled in her gut. The man finished. He threw the shredded tire in Cassidy's trunk and wiped his wet hands on a rag. He walked to her window. Cassidy cracked the glass an inch. The roar of the rain filled the cabin. "Thank you. I have cash. Let me give you something." He shook his head. "No money." He leaned in. His face was right at the glass, rain dripping from the brim of his cap. His eyes were hard. "You're all set, Cassidy," he said. He knew her name. He must have seen it on a bag in the trash. "Now listen to me. Don't stop again until you see city lights. People around here don't like folks lingering on the shoulder in a storm. Just keep your eyes on the road and drive." It sounded like an order. "I will," she whispered. He slapped her roof twice, then walked back to his wagon. The heavy door slammed with a hollow thud. Cassidy put her SUV in drive. She watched the wagon pull out. Its taillights were dim red squares in the heavy rain. That's when reality broke. Cassidy's high beams flooded the back of the wagon. The rear window was streaked with water and dirt, but the light hit it perfectly for a second. There was no luggage in the back. There was a person. A young woman in a gray hoodie lay flat on the cargo floor. Her face was pressed right against the glass. Cassidy gasped. The girl's eyes were wide, bloodshot, and frantic. They locked onto Cassidy's lights, but she wasn't screaming. She couldn't. A thick strip of silver duct tape was wrapped around her head, sealing her mouth. Her hands were zip-tied behind her back. She thrashed slightly, bumping the glass. Cassidy slammed her brakes. Her brain couldn't process it. The wagon accelerated. It rounded the curve and vanished into the storm. Cassidy stared at the empty road. She looked for a license plate in her memory. Nothing. Just a rusted, empty bracket. She sat there for a minute. The sound of the rain hammered the roof. "Drive!" her brain screamed. She floored it. She drove for 60 minutes without blinking. The sugar crash hit her hard. Her exhausted brain started playing tricks. The man had been nice. He changed her tire in a storm. Was that a person, she thought? Or a pile of camping gear? Did I see eyes? Or just rain distorting the light on a water bottle? She'd been driving 14 hours. She was exhausted. The rain played tricks on your eyes. "I'm losing it," she told herself. "I need to sleep." When she crossed the state line, her phone buzzed. She pulled into a lit gas station and dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? I think I saw something, Cassidy stammered. Route 220, an hour ago. What did you see? I think there was a girl in the back of a car, tied up. You think? The dispatcher asked. License plate. No, it didn't have one. Make and model? Old wagon, Ford, wood panels. Okay, we'll send a patrol. But without a plate, and in this weather, it's a long road. Cassidy hung up. She sat under the gas station lights. She bought another Red Bull and drove the final stretch to D.C. She never heard from the police. She searched the news for weeks. No reports of missing women. To this day, Cassidy wonders, did the rain and exhaustion make her see things? Or did she stand 10 feet from a monster, let him change her tire, and watch him drive away with a girl screaming behind a strip of tape? She just kept driving. That's what he told her to do. Tishomingo County is where the cell service dies and the woods take over. Mark didn't mind the drive. He was on his way to the Small Business Expo in Tupelo to present his landscaping portfolio. His college buddy, Edward, lived out this way and offered him a place to crash. "It saves you a hotel bill," Edward had said, "and you'll have total privacy. The guest house is way out back." Mark pulled his truck up the long gravel driveway on a Tuesday. Edward met him outside. He looked thinner than Mark remembered. "Place looks good, Ed," Mark said. "Yeah, it's quiet," Edward muttered. He pointed to a renovated structure about 200 yards away from the main house. It used to be a tractor shed, but Edward had added a second-floor loft and a bathroom. Mark settled in. He spent the evening working on his laptop, prepping his sustainable hardscaping slides. At 10 p.m., a knock came at the door. Mark opened it. Edward was standing there holding a round blue container of Morton table salt. "Hey," Edward said. He didn't make eye contact. He knelt down and began pouring a thick white line of salt across the door threshold. Mark laughed. "What are you doing? Slugs?" Edward didn't laugh. He finished the line, stood up, and capped the salt. "Just re-up in the line. Keeps the boogeyman out." "You're gonna get shot creeping around like that," Mark joked. "Good night, Mark," Edward said. He walked back into the darkness toward the main house. Wednesday night, the same thing happened. Edward showed up, poured a fresh layer over the old one, and left. Mark shook his head. "You've been in the woods too long, man." Thursday was the night before the expo. Mark was stressed. He had 3 hours of work left on his presentation. At 10 p.m., Edward arrived. He poured the salt. "Sleep tight," he said. Mark watched him walk away. He waited until Edward's flashlight disappeared into the trees. Mark looked down at the white line. It annoyed him. It was messy. It was tracking grit into the renovated floor. "Boogeyman," Mark whispered, rolling his eyes. He stuck his boot out. With one swift motion, he kicked the center of the salt line. The white crystals scattered across the porch, leaving a 6-inch gap of bare wood right in the middle of the doorway. "Oops," Mark chuckled. He went inside, slammed the door, and locked the deadbolt. He worked until 1:17 a.m. The silence of the woods was heavy. Scrape. The sound came from the front door. Mark froze. He took his headphones off. "Ed," he called out. "Quit messing around." Thump. It wasn't a knock, it was a heavy weight leaning against the wood. Mark walked to the door. He was about to unlock it and yell at Edward, but he stopped. He looked down at the gap at the bottom of the door. The porch light was off. In the pale moonlight, Mark saw feet. They were gray, they were bare. They looked like human feet, but the toes were too long, curled over the edge of the wood decking. Mark took a step back. The feet shifted. They shuffled sideways. The gray foot touched the salt on the left side of the door. It pulled back quickly, like it had stepped on a sharp rock. Then it moved to the right. It touched the salt there. It pulled back again. Mark felt a wave of relief. It works. He didn't know why, but the intruder didn't like the salt. Then the foot moved to the center. It found the gap Mark had made. The gray skin slid smoothly over the bare wood. No recoil. The door handle jiggled violently. The wood frame groaned. Mark scrambled backward. "Hey, I have a gun," he lied. The intruder didn't care. Fingers slid under the door, right through the gap. They were long, dirty, and gray. They hooked around the bottom of the door and pulled. The wood began to splinter. Mark needed to fix the line. He looked at the table. The salt shaker was empty. He remembered the loft. He had seen supplies stored up there. He ran to the ladder and scrambled up to the sleeping loft. He tore open the storage closet. Paint cans, tarps, and a heavy bag. A 50-pound bag of rock salt meant for the driveway. Downstairs, the door cracked loud enough to sound like a gunshot. The top hinge was giving way. Mark dragged the heavy bag to the small window above the porch. He forced the latch open and kicked the screen out. He looked down. He couldn't see a face. He just saw a dark shape pressing against the door, trying to force its way in. Mark didn't wait. He tipped the bag. The salt poured out like a waterfall. It cascaded down, hitting the porch roof and bouncing onto the figure below. It buried the doorway in a mound of white crystals. Mark waited for a scream. He waited for smoke. There was nothing. The scratching stopped instantly. The door handle stopped moving. Mark listened. He heard a soft shuffling sound, like dry leaves blowing across pavement. The shape down below didn't melt or burn. It just backed away. It seemed to realize the path was blocked. It retreated into the shadows of the tree line, moving fast and low to the ground. Then silence. Mark sat on the floor of the loft with a hammer in his hand. He didn't sleep. He watched the sun slowly crawl up over the trees. At 6 a.m., the sun was fully up. Mark walked downstairs. The front door was still standing, but the bottom was chewed up. A massive pile of salt blocked the entrance. Mark grabbed his laptop bag. He packed his suit for the presentation. He wasn't leaving his gear behind. He had worked too hard for this. He climbed out the back window. He stormed across the yard to the main house. He pounded on Edward's door. Edward opened it holding a mug of coffee. He looked sleepy. "Mark, you look terrible." "You think this is funny?" Mark yelled. He was shaking. "You think scaring the hell out of me is funny?" Edward looked confused. "What are you talking about?" The thing at the door last night." Mark pointed back at the shed. "I had to dump 50 pounds of salt on it to get it to stop." Edward looked past Mark at the shed. Then he looked back at Mark. A small, knowing smile crept onto his face. "Did you mess with the line?" Edward asked. I kicked it," Mark stammered. "It was a joke." Edward chuckled, shaking his head. "Dude, I told you. The boogeyman." "Stop lying, Ed. Was that you? Was that a mask?" Edward took a sip of coffee. He looked serious for a second. "Look, Mark, my grandma used to live in that cabin. She swore by the salt. She told me stories that would turn your hair white. I've been doing the salt line since I moved in just out of habit. It creeps me out not to do it." Edward shrugged. "I've never seen a single thing out here. Not once. I thought it was just old stories." He looked Mark right in the eye. "But if you saw something, well, that's on you, man. I told you not to touch the line." Mark stared at him. Edward wasn't scared. He didn't believe Mark. He thought Mark was the one losing his mind. Mark turned around. He walked to his truck. He tossed his gear in the passenger seat. He got in and started the engine. He looked in the rearview mirror as he drove away. Edward was still standing on the porch, drinking his coffee, watching him leave. Mark made it to the expo. He gave his presentation. He did fine. He and Edward still talk every now and then. They talk about football. They talk about business. But Mark never went back to Tishomingo. He always finds an excuse. Mark lives in a secure apartment complex now, 3rd floor. no porch. But he has developed a new habit. Every night before he goes to sleep, he checks the front door. He runs his hand along the bottom threshold, feeling for even the slightest gap between the door and the floor. And if he feels a draft, he doesn't just lock the deadbolt. He opens his pantry. Tucked in the back, behind the protein powder and the pasta, is a round blue container of Morton salt. He hasn't had to use it since that night, but he sleeps a lot better knowing it's there. Fancy Gap is less of a highway and more of a death trap when the fog rolls in. Drivers plow their sedans through the soup at 70 miles per hour, blind to the cliffs waiting on the shoulder. Billy respected the mountain, though. You don't push a rigid 18-wheeler through the Appalachian corridor for 30 years without learning when to quit. Billy was a professional. He kept his logbook clean and his temper under control. He was the guy who pulled over to help stranded motorists change tires in the rain. But tonight, the fatigue was heavy behind his eyes. 11:30 at night. Billy pulled the air brake at a time capsule rest stop off I-77. It wasn't a chain stop with showers and bright lights. It was a crumbling brick building with flickering fluorescent tubes and a parking lot full of potholes. Rain slicked the asphalt as Billy stepped down from the cab. Inside, the station smelled like pine cleaner and stale grease. He headed straight for the restroom, a cramped space with yellow tiles that looked like they hadn't been scrubbed since the 90s. He stood at the urinal, staring at the graffiti, just wanting to get back on the road. Footsteps echoed on the tile. Billy didn't look over. In this line of work, you mind your own business. But the stranger didn't use the facilities. He just stood there. He was too close. Billy could feel the man's presence right over his shoulder. A smell drifted off the guy. Not body odor, but something like wet dirt. It smelled like a forest floor after a storm. "Would you like to buy a poppet, friend?" The voice was raspy, like gravel grinding together. Billy zipped up and moved to the sink. He looked in the mirror. The man was small, wrapped in layers of mismatched flannel shirts, red plaid over green plaid. He looked like a walking pile of laundry. "It'll give you safe travels," the man said. He held out a dirty hand. In his palm sat a small, rough object. Billy grabbed a paper towel. "No thank you, sir. I appreciate it, but I'm all set. You stay safe out there." Just a local looking for beer money, Billy thought. He walked out. 5 minutes later, Billy was at the register buying a black coffee and a bag of jerky. He reached for his wallet. "Would you like a poppet, friend? It'll help your travels." Billy froze. He turned around slowly. It was the same man. Same mismatched flannel. Same smell of wet earth. But the man was looking at Billy with blank eyes. There was zero recognition in his face. It was like he had never seen Billy before in his life. "No, thank you, friend," Billy said, keeping his voice even. "Like I said in the back, I'm good. You have a good night." The man didn't blink. He didn't drop his hand. He just stared. Billy grabbed his coffee and pushed through the glass doors. The fog was getting thicker, swirling around the streetlights like smoke. He walked briskly toward his truck in the dark corner of the lot. He just wanted to put miles between himself and that glitch in the matrix. He reached for the door handle of his rig. A shadow moved between the trailers. Billy jumped back. It was him. Again. There was no way the little man could have beaten him here without running, and Billy hadn't heard footsteps. Yet there he stood by the driver's side door. "Would you like a poppet, friend?" Billy sighed. The patience was draining out of him. "Look, pal, I'm really okay. I've got to get on the road. Please step away from the truck." The man didn't move. Billy unlocked the door and climbed up. He felt heavy, exhausted. He pulled the heavy door shut. Just before it latched, The man whispered from the ground below. "You will need it for your travels. Have a great night." Billy slammed the door and locked it instantly. He looked down, but the fog had already swallowed the man up. "Creep," Billy muttered. He started the engine and rolled out. For the next 3 hours, the driving was brutal. The fog on Fancy Gap was a white wall. Billy couldn't see more than 10 feet in front of his hood. By 3 a.m., he couldn't do it anymore. He saw a sign for a secluded rest area, just a gravel patch off the highway, and took it. He parked the rig away from the road. The silence was instant. Now came the ritual. Billy had a safety routine he had followed for 20 years. First, he locked the driver's side door, tested it, locked. Second, he crawled across and locked the passenger door, tested it, locked. Third, he checked the window latches, tight. Finally, he snapped the heavy privacy curtain shut, sealing himself in the sleeper bunk. He was in a steel box, nothing in, nothing out. Billy stripped off his boots, climbed into the bunk, and fell into a deep sleep. Scratch, scratch. Billy drifted up from the darkness. Something was touching him. It was a light, rhythmic sensation on the top of his head. It felt like tiny wooden fingers gently combing through his hair. Billy's eyes snapped open. His heart hammered. He reached up and clicked on his reading light. The cab flooded with harsh white light. Billy scrambled backward, pressing his back against the wall. Sitting on the center of his pillow, right where his head had been resting, was the poppet. It wasn't just a generic doll. It was a small, hand-carved wooden figure wearing a tiny flannel shirt. Billy looked closer. The pattern on the doll's shirt was identical to the one Billy had hung up 20 minutes ago. The doll had a tuft of real gray hair glued to its head. And then Billy saw the face. Above the left eye, there was a tiny carved scar. Billy touched his own left eyebrow, feeling the jagged skin he had gotten in a fight decades ago. It was a perfect, terrifying miniature of him. Billy stopped breathing. He looked at the doors, locked, the windows, up, the curtain, shut. He was alone. It was physically impossible for this thing to be here. But the doll sat upright, facing him. Its painted eyes seemed to be staring right into his soul. Panic clawed at Billy's throat, but he acted. He grabbed a heavy leather work glove, refusing to touch the thing with his bare skin. He snatched the doll up. It felt warm. Billy lunged into the front seat. He jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared. As the wheels started to turn, he hit the button for the passenger window. Billy threw the doll with everything he had. The wooden figure sailed out into the dark, foggy woods. "Get away from me!" He rolled the window up and stomped on the gas. The truck lurched forward, gravel spraying. Billy didn't slow down until he was back on the highway, his speedometer climbing. He glanced at his side mirror. The red glow of his taillights illuminated the wet pavement behind him. Billy felt his stomach drop. Standing in the middle of the road, perfectly upright, was the small figure. It wasn't lying on its side. It was standing. It was facing the truck. As Billy sped away, disappearing into the fog, the small wooden man just watched him go. Billy drove until the sun came up. He never stopped at that rest area again, and he never, ever slept without checking the pillow first.